Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with some recent Russian reads, which is a mouthful. But I have recently kind of embarked on an obsession with Russian classics. I have read so many Russian classics recently that I decided that I should probably do a wrap-up video that focuses on them exclusively. A lot of these are very short classics, and it's very unusual for me to really feel pulled to pick up something that is short and to really enjoy it. I often feel like short books need to be made longer. I often don't see the point in reading short stories, but many of these Russian authors have already proven me wrong on that account. I feel like I need to reevaluate my relationship with short fiction and with short classics in general. But I've read 6 Russian classics in the past month or so, and I thought it might be best to talk about them in order from least to best, in my opinion, in terms of my enjoyment. So what I enjoy the least to what I enjoyed the most. For the most part, like I said, this is short fiction. And so what I'm talking about is probably not really the author's most famous work in some cases. In some cases it might be, but I have really enjoyed what I have read so far. So let's start with the one that I enjoyed the least. At the bottom of my list is Oblamov by Ivan Goncharov. I actually DNF'd this. I won't say this is the fault of the book, because I did listen to the majority of these on audiobook actually, but this is one where I really struggled with the audiobook narrator, and so I don't want to say it is totally the fault of the book, but it is also partially the fault of the book. So Oblama focuses on a nobleman who is essentially incapable of doing anything. He's really incapable of making a decision, of doing anything important or significant at all. And I think like for the first half of the book, he basically moved from the bedroom to the living room, from the bed to the couch. And his character is kind of poking fun at the Russian intelligentsia at the time. So this is a bit of a satire, and that is the part of the book that didn't work for me on any level, and I don't think had anything to do with the fact that I was listening to it on audiobook. Satire I do struggle with because I often feel as though it's very heavy-handed. In this case, it was very heavy-handed, but I will say there were multiple points where I laughed out loud. So I do think that I probably really would have enjoyed it had I had a different audiobook narrator or had I read it physically. And so I hate that I DNF'd this one, but I think I probably will come back to it. Next up is Evgeny Onyegen by Alexander Pushkin, and this is actually the Russian classic that essentially got me started on this recent obsession. And other than Oblamov, I really enjoyed everything that I read. So the fact that this is at number 5 does not mean that I didn't like it. But Evgeny Onyegen is a novel that was written in verse. And so it almost has kind of an epic poetry vibe to it, but it almost doesn't qualify as that because there's so much about it that still feels novel-like. It's very hard to categorize this book in my opinion, and so it's been very hard to kind of sum up how I feel about it. I wound up giving this 3 stars, I think, and I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely read more from Pushkin, but I was not really invested in our main character here. So Evgeny Onyegen focuses on a character who is a bit of a dandy, and he's pretty sick of occupying that role in society. He's pretty sick of basically sitting around doing nothing and not having an original thought. And so he becomes friends with a poet character who I thought was so fascinating. He was easily my favorite character, and through him he's introduced to a really, really wonderful dynamic female character that I was really excited about. And so I think the unfortunate thing is that Evgeny as a character falls flat compared to the other characters in the narrative around him. I was far more interested in them, but there is also a real Byronic quality to him that I did like. And I was constantly comparing this to Lord Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that because Childe Harold's Pilgrimage is one of my favorites of all time now, and I could see that they were trying to do similar things in terms of characterization, but it just didn't work for me as well as Childe Harold. But you can tell when you're reading this that Pushkin was a fan of Lord Byron. There are a lot of references to Lord Byron in it. But throughout the book, he becomes less and less interested in Lord Byron and in creating parallels with Lord Byron or Childe Harold. And that's when the book really becomes its own to me, and that's when I really liked it. It's very unusual that I like the second half of a book more than the first, but I really liked the second half of Evgeny Onyegen. So this is number 5 on my list. I really enjoyed this. And so now everything else is a total and complete success. Some of my favorites of the year are up here. So next I have A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov, and everyone recommended this to me after I read Evgeny Onyegen because this is also a work of Russian romanticism. So Evgeny Onyegen is a bit of a romantic work, but I could really feel it in A Hero of Our Time in a way that I didn't with Evgeny Onyegen. I really struggled with understanding what about Evgeny Onyegen qualified as romantic, except in a couple of cases. That poet character I was discussing, I could see shades of the romantic movement in him in particular, but it really shines here. So this book is purported to be a diary, so it's structured like a diary, and I really, really like that. I think that worked very well for this. Our main character is what you would call a Byronic hero, definitely, but I didn't really find him all that likable, which is unusual for me with Byronic heroes. I typically do really like the trope of a Byronic hero. It didn't really work all that well for me here because I found him to be incredibly unlikable. I didn't feel like there were very many qualities to him that were redeemable or that were interesting enough to make up for his faults. But the reason that I rank this higher than Evgeny Onyegen is its descriptions of nature. So our main character is a soldier who is stationed in the Caucasus. And so there's a lot of traveling around and there's a lot of moving through the mountains. And sometimes he will just stop in his diary entry and say, we're passing by the mountains. And he'll describe how the countryside looks, the sky, the weather. And it's just so rich and really wonderful to read. And that definitely is very romantic feeling to me. And I think that's probably largely why I enjoyed the book. My enjoyment had less to do with the characters and the plot than it did with that nature writing. When he moved into a section and I could tell that he was about to start talking about nature, I got really excited. I said, oh good, he's on the move. We're gonna hear something else about the mountains. We're gonna hear something else about the countryside. I really, really enjoyed this, so thanks to all of y'all who recommended it to me. This is one that really makes me curious. I'm really curious now about the rest of Lermontov's works because I believe he was also a poet. So I would be very interested to read his poetry. At number 3, we have Ward Number 6 by Anton Chekhov. And Ward Number 6 is essentially gonna stand in for the entire collection of short stories that I read. I also listened to this on audiobook, and I will tell you, the audiobook was narrated by Richard Armitage because Richard Armitage was in Uncle Vanya, I think last year, and so he read the short stories for research, and so he wound up doing a short story collection for Audible. And I won't say that my enjoyment of this audiobook had nothing to do with Richard Armitage. It had everything to do with Richard Armitage. You all know I have a big crush on Richard Armitage. But I do think had I read this, I would still have enjoyed it. I still would have enjoyed it just as much. This was a collection of, I think, 7 short stories, but Ward Number 6 took up the majority at the time. So I almost wonder if Ward Number 6 is actually a novella and not a short story. But this focuses in on a doctor who works at an asylum, and he forms kind of a connection, a friendship with one of the patients there. He almost doesn't believe this patient deserves to be in the asylum. And so they form a connection and they start having a really interesting conversation. And things go from there. I won't say anything because I don't want to spoil it for you, but this really had me going. I was very shocked by this, and I just genuinely really, really liked it. And there was so much commentary on how asylums were constructed at the time and how deficient they were, how they really didn't help anybody. The patients there were not getting helped. They were getting abused. And so there was a lot of focus on that. And so it was really fascinating from that perspective. You could tell he was commenting on this, that he didn't agree with what was going on. So this was a very, very interesting novella because it contained a lot of social commentary, but it was also such an engaging story. And Ward number 6 was easily the standout for me amongst this collection, but I really loved a lot of the other short stories. There was a short story called The Black Monk that I thought was particularly interesting. And so I really, really enjoyed this collection. And if you have Audible Plus, I highly encourage you to listen to it. I don't say this just because I'm a little in love with Richard Armitage, but he is a very, very good audiobook narrator. Okay, maybe I do say it because I'm a little in love with Richard Armitage. In second place is First Love by Ivan Turgenev. And as I am sitting here thinking about this, I'm gonna boost my rating for this and I'm rating it 5 stars. I am obsessed with this. And of everything that I'm discussing here today, this is the one it felt like I was taking a chance on. This is the one that I had heard nothing about because everybody else I kind of had some opinions about, some preconceived notions about what the book might be about, how their writing might be, but I know nothing about Ivan Turgenev, and I had never heard anything about First Love prior to picking up the audiobook. But boy, am I glad I did. This is probably the most exciting one on this list to me because I am really encouraged to go from here and read more of his work. So the setup for this is at the start of this novella. Everyone is kind of talking about the stories of their first love, and the main character says, I actually have the best story. And so he tells the story of his first love. And I went into this thinking this is going to be sappy. This is going to be sad. This is going to be, you know, something very, very depressing or even saccharine, you know, just something that was over the top cheesy. And that is not what this is at all. This book is so engaging and it really shocked me. I didn't really know where this was going. So this was apparently a very autobiographical book for Ivan Turgenev. He actually went through the same exact situation as the main character with his first love. And so it is a very, very painful read. It is sad in that way, and it is melancholy in that way, because you can definitely feel that he put his heart and soul into this. And the ending, how this novella ended, the last line, it's just incredible. This was such a really wonderful, well-contained story. I often feel with short fiction, with novellas, with short stories, that they were a bit of a waste of my time because I didn't have time to get engaged. I didn't have time to really get invested in the characters, get invested in the plot. And so I often wish things were longer rather than shorter. But this is a situation where I did not want it to be longer. It is very, very short, but that means there is no wasted time in it. There's no fat on this story whatsoever. Everything has its place. Even if you're wondering about it and you're thinking, why are we going on this tangent? Why are we discussing this when we should get back to the main story? Trust me, it will fall into place. I think this is probably the most beautifully written of all of the 5 that I've talked about so far. This is definitely the most beautifully written. The unfortunate thing is I read the majority of these on audiobook, and it's not always stated in the audiobook who the translator is. So I have no clue who translated these for the most part. So I don't know if I got a really great translation of First Love, and some of these others I got a poorer translation of, but I really, really loved First Love by Ivan Turgenev. And he is probably the author that I'm most excited about going forward, except for this author who is at number 1. So let's go to number 1. My favorite of my recent Russian reads is The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. This is really not a fair competition because The Idiot is a fully fledged novel. It's a very long book, and most everything else that I have discussed was very short, and so it does seem unfair to compare them. But The Idiot is definitely far and away my favorite recent Russian read. It's my favorite Russian classic of the year thus far, and actually it's just my favorite Russian classic so far. So I am just really, really enjoying my journey with Dostoyevsky. Reading this was so encouraging for me because it made me immediately want to pick up something else by him. And I felt the same way with Ivan Turgenev. The Idiot focuses on our main character, Prince Mishkin, who is very naive and very kind-hearted. He is just a very good person. And so he is very forgiving. He's very innocent. He really doesn't assume that you might have any ulterior motive when you approach him. And so most of the other characters in the narrative view him as an idiot because of that. And I think the most rewarding thing about this book, in my opinion, is that Prince Mishkin never has to change. He never has to become more worldly wise. He never has to become mean. He is just a really good person, and he stays true to that throughout the novel, and that is just the most rewarding thing about it, in my opinion. But the plot is so engaging. This almost feels like you're reading a thriller a bit, because things are going on with certain characters and you're constantly wondering what on earth are they going to do next. And so there is a page turner aspect to this, but there's also a really introspective, very dynamic look at each of these individual characters. And one of my favorite scenes in this book was with a character that I didn't really like, and that is with Ippolit, who is a consumptive young man. And frequently he just went on these tangents, and he was really, really offensive to other people, particularly to Prince Mishkin. But he knew throughout the novel he had a certain amount of time left. And he said at one point, "You were laughing just now at my wanting to talk out of the window for a quarter of an hour. But do you know I am not 18? I've lain so much on that pillow and looked out of that window and thought so much about everyone. A dead man has no age, you know." It's been weeks since I read it. I've been reading this book for over a month, and it's been weeks since I read it. And there's something about a dead man has no age. That this boy is 18, he is on death's doorstep, but he already feels like he's so far beyond 18. You know, because he spent so much time sick. He spent so much time knowing he was going to die. So a dead man has no age. I mean, it just started making me reflect on how some people, when they're near death, you know, they start talking about their childhood memories again, and they feel young again. And some people, like Ippolit, who is very, very young, feel so much older than their age when they have been suffering something like that. I mean, it is just truly profound. It seems very silly to say that a line like that moved you, but it really did move me, because it spiraled me into thinking about so many other different things. It was just really moving, a really emotional passage, and there were several of them in this book. This was just a really, really wonderful read, and I will definitely do an individual review on this because I loved this. This is one of my favorite books of the year, so I am just so excited to continue on with Dostoyevsky. I'm not quite sure where I will go with him next, or with Ivan Turgenev, but I would love to know down below where you would suggest I go next with Russian classics. I would love to know what your favorite Russian classics are. I would love to know if you have read any of these or if they're on your TBR. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.